Hello everybody, my name is Todd from Healthy History, and today I would like to read you the reflection which I wrote for the nation as it celebrates its 250th birthday. My goal in writing this is to inspire action, create real and lasting change, and to put on blast the severe issues this nation and the American people face today. I hope you find inspiration and fuel for change making within this reflection. If I could, I would publish this as a pamphlet akin to Thomas Paine's Common Sense. However, a video reading will have to suffice for now. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment in order for this video and its message to reach many more people. And I hope you enjoy 250, a reflection. It wasn't too long ago that I took a trip alongside my family to the revolutionary city of Boston, Massachusetts. While I was there, I visited a variety of Revolutionary-era historical sites, among which include the house of Paul Revere, the Old North Church, the graves of John Hancock, Samuel Adams, and the victims of the Boston Massacre, along with the site of the Boston Massacre itself. None of the places I visited impacted me as much as the site of the North Bridge in Concord. When you cross the bridge, you see a Minuteman standing strong and by his lonesome in the same spot where brave American Minutemen stood when they collectively let go the volley of fire heard round the world in the early hours of April 19, 1775. As my 17-year-old self stood in that spot, it all of a sudden struck me how much the consecrated grounds on which I stood represented. The patriots of the Massachusetts Bay Province's years of bottled-up anger and resentment which they held against the tyrannical British occupying force all led up to this moment, when the Americans were finally able to riddle their tyrannical foes with balls of lead. The ground upon which my meager self stood was the same ground upon which the angered colonists of the Massachusetts Bay Province stood up to the Goliath that was the British Empire, kickstarting a series of events that would not only start a revolution, but would change the world forever. Upon taking all of this and more into account, my eyes could not help but water. My eyes watered even more, filling with pure feelings of shame and disgrace as how I thought of those brave Minutemen and all the other warriors of the Revolution would feel looking at the country which we call the United States of America today. Those men who started a world-altering revolution over being taxed without representation. Those men who tarred and feathered the British soldiers who occupied their homes without their permission. Those men who endured the harsh winters at Valley Forge and Morristown, freezing to death in the process. I ask you, what would those men think of us, Americans, today? Us, Americans, who sit idly by and seemingly forget that it wasn't too long ago when we were flat out told that our government is occupied by people who harm and allow for the harming of children in the most heinous of ways. Us, Americans, who sit in compliance as flock cameras track our every move, stalk our walking patterns, and gather our facial recognition data without our consent. Us Americans who kick their seats back and watch as AI takes more and more jobs each day and kills human purpose slowly but surely, and is allowed to do so because it's cheaper in the long run, and also because the people in power say it's okay. Us Americans who do nothing as AI data centers continue to be built all over the country, which are not only vandals to our peace, but also to our beautiful nature and environment. Us Americans who enable our own president to call off all IRS investigations on himself. Us Americans who sit content with the fact that there is a trillionaire whose wealth grows continually, while the wealth gap rises and the percentage of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck is over half of the population. Us Americans who watch as those who are supposed to represent us insider trade and make millions, while their own constituents struggle to make ends meet. Us Americans who are seemingly okay with a healthcare system which prioritizes delivering a profit to its shareholders rather than the life of its patient. Us Americans who pay taxes knowing the hard-earned dollars we send to the federal government are pumped into war crimes and inhumane operations by the IDF. Us Americans who spectate and sometimes even support the fact that money continues to buy our elections. Money not only from corporations, but from foreign interests and countries. Us open-minded Americans who sit in echo chambers all day and devolve to reject everything that we don't hear from that said echo chamber. Those patriots who spat in the face of tyranny would be disgusted beyond the point of comprehension at us Americans. The skeletons of those valiant patriots could be reanimated with the amount of disgust which they would feel at us modern Americans. Those men would possibly regret fighting how hard and courageously they did, seeing the cowardly, shivering, and mangy dog that is today's average American. the one who stays distracted by bread and circus while the world around them slowly deteriorates, only caring for their country on the 4th of July when it's time to light fireworks and indulge in some drinking. Ask yourself, would you even consider enlisting in the armed forces today, knowing all the rancid and infected things you'd be fighting for? If I were alive 85 years ago, I'd be cutting in line at the recruiter's office to go and fight the Japanese, just as my Bronze Star winning great-great-uncle Isidore did. But now, the thought of joining the military repulses me, and I'm sure it also has the same repulsing effect on countless others. Why would I go and fight for a country in which greed and corruption runs rampant? A country that protects and fights for the countless powerful people who are overly present in the Epstein files. A country which has a trillionaire and allows corporations and foreign interests to buy politicians and elections. A country which is complicit in the deaths of tens of thousands of men, women, and children in Gaza and Lebanon, and which is currently disgracing its own revolutionary ideals. A country with a leader who is so obviously connected to one of the sickest men to ever exist that it physically hurts to see Americans support and listen to him. Would you go and fight for this American nation, knowing of all these atrocious realities? It fills me with sorrow and anger when I attempt to speak to my grandfather, my own grandfather, tell him how the country his family fought to save is slowly being torn to shreds, only to receive a reply consisting of news outlet talking points or him simply saying that I sound woke. An English teacher could use the earlier section as a textbook example of repetition and parallel structure, and I regret having to repeat so much. However, if the list of ills contained in that parallel structure and repetition does not show you how sick and disease-ridden this country is, I don't know what will. I often hear people say something along the lines of, "We've been through tough and polarizing times before. It'll all be okay." What these people fail to realize is the only reason that it turned out okay is because brave men and women stepped up to do something about the ills affecting the country in those times of polarization, conflict, and uncertainty. On this nation's 250th birthday, I ask, what else will it take, America? What is the breaking point? Where will you draw the line? Clearly, it's not at the child sex trafficking ring in which countless of today's powerful elites were implicated. I beg you to remember that we come from individuals who fired upon one of the world's most powerful military forces because they got a few taxes thrown at them. People who tarred and feathered those who ruled over them tyrannically. I would like to remind each and every one of you that the American spirit resides deep within you, and it is at a point far beyond disgust. It is your job to get involved and let that spirit out. Quit standing by and complaining while simultaneously having your attention taken away from the stage 3 cancer which this country is infected by bread and circus, by DoorDash and Love Island, by work drama and doom scrolling. Complaining and then taking no action is almost the same as encouraging what you complain about. Go out and organize, start movements, protest, write, spread real-life awareness, and draw attention to these issues. Make them prominent. Don't just repost news headlines on your phone for the societal approval of others and think you're doing enough. Become educated. Start boycotts. Get involved in your community. Do great things that will allow us humans, our creativity and indomitable spirit, to conquer the threat posed by AI. I tell each and every individual that resides in this country that recognizing and fighting these issues does not require a specific allegiance to a political party. It simply requires you to understand and cherish the true and original values which this nation was founded upon, and which this nation fought to develop further, and fight for them against the tyrannical forces which constantly and deliberately infringe upon them. Although it took a civil war and further fighting to solidify it, this nation was founded on the premise that all men were created equal. Decades of protest was needed for that equality to extend to women as well. But that is the beauty of America, that things can be changed. We are not a stagnant republic bound to something akin to Hammurabi's Code. Americans have time and time again changed the ways in which this country operates for the better. If the modern American does not change his ways soon, those men at the North Bridge and Concord will have lined up against the British Goliath for nothing. Nothing at all. The fate of this land lies in your hands, and if it collapses, there will be no one left to blame but yourself. Was it not Jefferson, the same man who penned the Declaration of Independence, who said, "When tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes duty. Evil will always exist. Problems will always occur. But it is your job to ensure that evil is always defeated and that problems are always solved. As long as you understand true American values, not today's patriotic values which protect corporations and criminals, you should be able to shrug off the threats, buzzwords, and labels which politicians throw at you for challenging their greed, corruption, and tyranny. For I tell you that the American spirit is not blindly following your country or party and listening only to what they have to say, but it is using the freedom you rightfully possess to think for yourself and speak out against and recognize the greed, corruption, and tyranny which infects this country today. The best way to celebrate the 250th birthday of this great nation is not to simply drink and blow off fireworks, but to actively embrace, practice, and live by the principles described by the Founding Fathers in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, as well as the rights fought for in the hundreds of years following. By doing this, you honor the sacrifices made, the blood shed, and the crying mothers of the Revolution, whose sons were cut down by infringing British bullets. Do not sit idly by while tyranny is normalized like most Americans do daily. If you are one of the few who stand up and fight against the tyrannies and issues spoken about earlier, I applaud you and encourage you to keep going. The American spirit guides you and blesses you. If you are not, you must stand up to today's Goliath just like those brave Minutemen at the North Bridge did, as well as the countless other Americans who did the impossible and triumphed over their tyrannical foe. My brothers and sisters of America, there is nothing at all inherently different from you and those brave souls, except that they were courageous enough to fight and triumph over tyranny. I quote to you 35th President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who transcribed in his book, Profiles in Courage, "The stories of past courage can define that ingredient. They can teach, they can offer hope, they can provide inspiration, but they cannot supply courage itself. For this, each man must look into his own soul." Ladies and gentlemen of America, I ask you too to look into the depths of your own soul and find that courage. Drag it out, kicking and screaming if you have to, but by all means, do it. Do it not only for the sake of yourself and for your own livelihood, but for the sake of the future of this great nation, as well as your children and their children. For if no stand is taken at this pivotal moment in American and world history, there will not be anything left to stand on in the future, as us Americans will continue to have our liberties taken away, right by right, line by line, and piece by piece. Thank you all for watching, and let the American spirit guide you.